Welcome to the Mental Wellbeing Show, where we take a deep dive into the wonderful worlds of psychology and mental well-being. All right, so Dr. Nick Galli, thanks for joining me on the Mental Wellbeing Show today. Really excited to talk about male body image concerns with you. Maybe if we could start by perhaps asking you to paint a picture as to what we mean when we talk about male body image concerns.
What we're talking about is a person's perspective on their own body. So I do think that is often a point of confusion, is that you use the phrase body image and people, for whatever reason, get the sense that it's the image that they want to project to other people, but really it's your own image of yourself, which could well be, in line with reality or in some cases skewed. There's four parts of body image. So, if we were going to be completely accurate, we would, specify, are we talking about the way that somebody feels about their body? We call that body image affect. So I might feel very proud of my body, or I might feel lackluster or disappointed in my body. The way we think about our body. So I might have thoughts about my body that are very empowering, or I might have thoughts that are, where I beat myself up a little bit about how my body looks. There's the perceptual part of body image. So that's what I was talking about before, is how do I actually view the dimensions of my body? And we have some pretty cool, assessments that can sort of see where there might be a gap between how someone views their body and how their body actually is. And then the last element of it is the behavioral aspect. And that's simply the actions that someone takes to alter their body. And so we don't have different definitions of female and male, but what we do know is that male body image and body image satisfaction in men is a bit different than it is in women, influenced by different factors, and what it means to have a positive body image is a bit different between men and women.
Right. Okay. So you kind of alluded there in those, I think it was 4 components to behaviors. So I'm wondering, can you give us a bit of an insight as to what typically you see we can go with male population because I think that's what you've predominantly researched, right? Well, what are some of the kind of typical behaviors, thoughts, and feelings you might kind of get from someone experiencing, these body image concerns, if you can?
Yeah, so from an it's a lot of what you might expect, and one of the questions that you sent me, I really liked, because you sort of alluded to this idea that it's a continuum, right? It's, I know we're not here today talking about eating disorders, but eating disorders, there are diagnosable components of those, but there is also it ranges on a continuum. So some people with an eating disorder might be more acute or more at risk, and others, might be more low level symptoms. And same with body image. Unfortunately, at least here in North America, I don't know as much about what's going on in Australia, but I imagine it's more common than not that you will find people who are able to pick out at least one thing about their body that they would like to change, that sort of bothers them or has always bothered them or been a sticking point. And the extent to which that ends up becoming something that actually interferes with their life and is very distressing, I think then that gets back to their upbringing, their personality, their biology, right? Some folks are able to sort of say, I wish my nose wasn't so big, but whatever, I got it from my mom and it's no big deal, is what it is. I hardly ever think about it, right? And then you might talk to another person who would have a really hard time with that and would think about it every day and sort of obsess about it, and even maybe go to the extent where they would look to have a surgical intervention to change their nose, for example. So you're looking at people who tend to be overly preoccupied. And you're going to be able to tell this by how they talk about themselves, how much they seem to connect their worth as a person to what's going on with their body. So if it seems like, oh, they've spent, we're in these months now, out here, at least where I am, where everyone's at the gym and everyone is working out to get their beach body or whatever, and that's great, and people feel really good about themselves when they go and exercise. But if their mood seems to drastically alter because, hey, I see, like, I've got a little bit more definition, or I can kind of make out, there's an outline on my arm, and I've lost a little bit of the part that's sagging, and that seems to really dictate how good they feel about themselves, disproportionately. And the reverse could be true too, that, like, oh, I'm seeing this, or I haven't been able to go to the gym for a week. And so they just sort of, they're on this constant treadmill of, they just can't, uh, their self-worth is so tied to, their behaviors related to their body, and how they perceive their body looks. So I think the actions and the ways that people talk about their body is a good indication of how concerned they might be. But it's a wide range. It really is a wide range.
Well, do you feel that it's very much a gray area, or do you feel it's quite clearly delineated between, what is a disorder, what is, body dysmorphic disorder, what is muscle dysmorphia, and what is, it's just someone having, yeah, some.
Well, and that's an interesting question, Indy. I think from the standpoint of diagnosis, it's more clearly delineated. But even then, we know that two different clinicians might, one may have diagnose someone and one may not, or when one may have one diagnosis and one may have a separate diagnosis. But I think when it comes to diagnosing someone with anorexia or bulimia nervosa, for example, there are, we've kind of got it down. Body image concerns in themselves are not, that's not diagnosable. We do have, body dysmorphic disorder isn't, I guess, an extreme case of body image concern. But for me, anyways, when I've gone, one thing about my history professionally is I've gone from being more of a researcher to more of a clinician. And so now I'm, more in the real world and getting to talk to people. And when you're working, especially with young adults, the body comes up a lot, and food comes up a lot. And you just pay attention to how much it seems to be occupying their daily behaviors. And if it seems like, their concern with their body and their behaviors with their body are interfering with doing other things that they once liked to do, or do like to do, that's, to me, like, okay, there's a nice line for me to say this, maybe this is a problem. But I think, we are kind of in a place now where you're surprised when you meet, especially a young adult who just always feels super happy and satisfied about their body, because we're sort of bombarded and inundated with images that suggest that there is a gap between how we look and how we might want to look.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're saying, young adults as well, because, I think maybe when I was growing up, body image and eating disorders was predominantly thought of as something that propagated in young female populations. Whereas I know you've done a lot of research, particularly in the young male population. So what are you seeing both in your research and clinically in terms of prevalence rates, and perhaps even changes in the disposition between genders? And I want to acknowledge that there's more than just male and female.
Yeah, of course, right. And I think we're still learning a lot about that, right? And in non-binary populations and eating disorders, there's still so much we don't know. Um, I think it's still the case that with our classic eating disorders and classic symptoms of fear of gaining weight and being fat, that's more often something that girls and women talk about. Um, but not only girls and women, there are boys and men who have concerns along those lines as well. It becomes a little bit more nuanced with boys and men. And I think this is, it's not even debatable now that we know there's sort of these two pathways with boys and men, that there's the pathway to, wanting to be more muscular. And there's also a pathway to wanting to be less fat. And often it's a mixture of both. In some research that I did many years ago, and this was with male identifying college student athletes, and we would talk about, how they felt about subjectively about their weight and their body fat. And nearly all of them had a desire both to gain weight and simultaneously lower their body fat. They all wanted to put on weight, but have it be lean mass. And I think that's probably pretty, representative of what, college men feel to be the case. And then there's also this weird, well, but I don't want to be too big. You almost always say, if you read any study where men are interviewed, especially heterosexual men, they'll talk about, I don't want to be too big, but I want to have some muscle mass, and I want to be lean. I want to look athletic. I think that's, more often the talk with men. And we miss a lot of things with boys and men, I think, because a lot of our assessment tools aren't designed as much to measure the unique body image concerns that they have.
All right. I mean, yeah, a lot of what you're saying as well about that ideal of an athletic and big but not too big kind of physique is definitely ringing true, to myself in terms of what we are bombarded with by, these external kind of, particularly in media, external influences of what we should look like.
Yep. And we know that social media is correlated with consumption of social media is correlated with worse body image.
Okay. Is that
The more social media that we consume, usually the worse we we feel about our body, even if it's sort of transient and short lasting. Even if we're consuming good, well-intentioned messages about living a healthy life, if the image next to that is of someone that seems very aspirational in terms of their body, it takes us down a few pegs. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, it's a really interesting point. So I have a question on that. This is just like a little working hypothesis. When you say consumption of social media, does it matter if you say you're using social media to just message friends rather than like scroll through a news feed, for example? Would that have a different effect on?
Mm, yeah, no, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. What's your intention behind your social media? That's probably important, right? But I would imagine it does matter.
Because it's about the upward comparisons, right? In terms of body image, comparing to that
Right.
ideal. That's what's damaging,
That's
right?
right. That's right. That's right. So if you're mainly using your social media as a tool to stay connected with, you know, um, family and people who you're very close with, I would imagine it's less likely that you're using them as a marker. But the further out in your network that you get, the more at risk you are for these types of comparisons. And that was something else I was going to say. Almost always at the root of what we see with the body image concerns is some type of comparison, whether it's an other comparison or a comparison to maybe how I used to look. Oh, when I was this age or last year, those comparisons can get us into trouble. So that's when we talk about strategies and what can we do, I think is no, we can never completely eliminate comparisons, but we can be more critical in our comparisons and maybe more balanced in our comparisons, and not so focused on judging books by their cover, right? So there's lots of different comparisons that we can make.
Okay, that makes sense. So there's a few places I kind of wanted to go with that. I suppose what's coming to mind then is in terms of like influences and kind of causal factors beyond media, are there things like personality variables or even like low self-esteem? Is that something that you see as kind of, a driver of
Hmm.
later body image concerns?
We do see that in both men and women: low self-esteem, high perfectionism. Um, Years ago there was this discovery, and a lot of my work has been done in sport and athletics, that there seems to be this nice overlay in the personality characteristic of a high level athlete and somebody who has an eating disorder. They're high achievement oriented, and they're perfectionistic and driven, and um, but also very much sensitive to failure and loss. And um, so it's an interaction. um, any mental health concern um, is some type of interaction between who you are as a person and experiences in your life.
What is it about, do you think, about particularly the kind of college age population that predisposes them so much to, these concerns? Because a lot of the data I've seen, it does propagate body image and eating disorders in teenage, young adult kind of age categories.
Yeah, I think we look at what we know about lifespan development, and sort of the crises that all of us navigate through over the years. And there's a lot of different models of how that looks. But if we teenage, which I'm going to classify as 13 to 25. I mean, I still think we're very much teenagers into our early mid 20s. We're just so vulnerable, and we're trying to find out who we are. And we're breaking away from family in the sense that their mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and whoever aren't any longer just the only source of information about how good we are or our worth. Now we're seeking other validation. As a young man, as a teenager and a young man, we have hormonal influences. Our brain is developing, and also um, not working quite as well as it will in terms of making rational decisions. If we are wrapped up as a man in a certain very narrow, rigid conception of what it means to be a man and masculine, I think that's a big part. And same with women for femininity, right? We have these still very dominant views of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and part of that goes to the body, what the body can do, and what the body looks like. Um, so, and it continues. I mean, now we're learning more about these problems in middle-aged men and women, but most often the origin is in the preteen, teen years, precisely for the reasons I just mentioned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just thinking back to my own, concerns as well. I know, as a teenager, young adult, you watch a lot of these action movies and the superheroes, Thor, Iron Man,
Yes.
Captain America, James Bond, they all have this, very
Yes.
stereotypical physique, right? The washboard
Yes.
abs, the big chiseled muscles, and
Absolutely. I think in the 1990s and early 2000s, and this is some of the work that really got me passionate about, in addition to my own experiences, got me passionate about this area, is a book that maybe you've read, but your audience might be interested in it. I'm sure you could get it very cheap on Amazon now. It's called The Adonis Complex, by a psychiatrist named Harrison Pope, he was at an Ivy League school at one point, I believe Harvard, and a lot of the really cool research they did on the influence of toys and magazines and how toys changed from the 1960s through the 80s and into the 2000s. And that matters. I mean, we internalize that. I mean, we know that it's complicated. The way that we develop body image concerns is a process, and part of that process is, some people believe it starts with feeling the pressure or the expectations from other sources that becomes at some point internalized. Now, the extent of that internalization, I think that might depend, to go back to your point, Indy, on personality and other factors. But when we do embrace and internalize these expectations that are maybe tied to unrealistic societal ideals, that's when we become dissatisfied with how our body looks, and at some point maybe develop pathological tendencies because of that.
Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, just coming back to your point as well about vulnerability in a particular age group. I know the Butterfly Foundation, it's the national kind of eating disorder charity here in Australia. I was reading that one of the top 3 life concerns for males aged 15 to 19 is now, one of them is now body image concerns.
Wow.
Again, I many years ago would have thought, this is just a female concern, but yeah, it's certainly not the case, is it anymore?
No, not at all.
And you mentioned, Nick, that you've been working more and more in clinical practice with body image and eating disorders. Is that right? Or with people with?
Not as the primary. I work with student athletes, and so see a range of concerns. But yeah, part of that is often body related, either from a performance perspective and or an appearance perspective. Sport's interesting in that way, in that we do have, as a high school or college athlete, I'm still a high school or college student and have all of the same pressures to look a certain way. And then as an athlete, I have the additional pressures to perform, and that might have certain bodily specifications involved there. And then to take it a step further, if I'm a certain type of athlete, the line between performance and aesthetics becomes blurred. Gymnastics, diving, figure skating, where that actually becomes part of the performance. Your aesthetics becomes a part of how you're judged. So then it becomes very intertwined.
So how do they go about dealing with that? Because yeah, I imagine those pressures, particularly in those kind of college student athlete environments, are immense to look and perform a certain way. So how do you go about treating that?
I mean, where I start is just validating, and like with anything else, you validate that it's hard, and that they're being bombarded by a lot of messages and a lot of agendas that other people have for them, for the client, and maybe things that people are projecting onto them. So, for me, it's never about trying to convince them that they're overreacting or to, prove them wrong. It's about that first validating and understanding that, okay, I get that these feelings are real. And then, for me, it's about talking about, at some point, the body beyond, and the person beyond the appearance, and really having a multifaceted identity, and embracing the parts of you that have nothing to do with, necessarily what the body looks like, especially if you're an athlete, being able to really appreciate and embrace what your body can do. I mean, we can all do that, right? But I think high level athletes maybe take for granted like how amazing their bodies are, that they can run so fast and perform so skillfully. And why can't that be an important part of, how you feel about your body as well? So we have those talk about, who can you associate with? Who do you want to surround yourself with that's going to empower you rather than, rob you or make you feel like you're less than, maybe because your body, or we have what's known as a contagion effect. And this is in sports and out of sports. You can kind of catch these attitudes, right? In the locker room or from other people, when people, and at home from mom or dad. If mom or dad are constantly on the new fad diet, or, you know, highs and lows because of their body, like, we can catch that. So I think, that's not something that I, as a clinician, can change. But I can get them thinking about it and get them thinking about what space is a healthy space for them to be in. And potentially I might have the opportunity to work at the team level. And that's where we can make real change, is changing the culture of some of these environments, whether it's with a team or a classroom or a whole school. Like we've seen here in the States with bullying, right? Bullying is, as there's, in the last 15, 20 years, we've finally realized this is not just something that we brush off. This is very serious. And so now we see all these initiatives, like anti-bullying. And I think the body actually comes into play with that campaign as well. But that's really what we have to do. We can't just, if we're going to, make this better, it can't be just about waiting until folks are in enough distress where they go into therapy and working with each individual person. It's just not an effective way. It has to be a community-based approach and a societal-based approach, which is very big. And the problem with that, as in any major public health or community health issue, is, unfortunately, there are people and entities that profit and benefit off of propagating the messages that make us sick.
Right. So who are these people and entities in this particular case?
I'm just thinking about, here in the States, it has been commercial fitness centers and the images that they project, and supplement companies, and the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that supplement companies make from, convincing people that you need this supplement so that you can, achieve this body, essentially. So, as with any problematic behavior that's just pervasive, usually you end up having to fight like the big dogs.
Yeah, no, that reminds me, I was looking at data as well about teenage supplement use, particularly protein supplement use, and that's been increasing a lot over the last couple of decades. As
Is it really? I I was hoping it was going down. I haven't looked. I mean, that was another one of my like late teenage experiences when I had one of my first jobs and I was really into bodybuilding, and I would go and blow like half of my paycheck on supplements from the supplement store that, the guy behind the counter convinced me, I needed this, this, and this. Um, and the here, the Food and Drug Administration has no, if it's a supplement, if it's classified as a supplement, they don't do anything with it.
right.
So anything could be on the shelves
Okay.
if it's a supplement.
Yeah, I was looking as well at steroid use in first time users here in Australia. We have these like harm minimization clinics where you can go and like inject I think any substance really, but in the public in clinic in like a safe space without legal repercussions. And some of those rates, again, in the last decade or so, more and more people are coming for steroid use, and a lot of them are first timers, which I think, again, with all the other statistics and what we've been talking about, paints a kind of picture again about these young males feeling this pressure to kind of conform to that ideal.
It's just, to like back up and take our, 10,000-foot view. All of this, the message is people aren't happy with who they are. And one of the ways that this manifests is in, probably the most in your face way is of how I appear. And so that becomes a primary target for many of us is, well, I don't like who I am, so I'm going to change how I look, and maybe then I'll like who I am. And the extra sad part about it is, you don't hear about people deciding that they're going to abuse steroids or whatever it might be, and then hitting a point where they're like, okay, I'm good. Usually it ends up being, the next thing and the next goal and more, and the satisfaction that you're seeking, the pleasure that you're seeking from making these changes, you're on the treadmill. You never hit your goal. So that's why I say getting back to, my role as a clinician is helping them, find some peace in, the process of being an imperfect human being.
Mm. Yeah, I think you mentioned this term earlier, but self-worth, that feels like what it
Mm-hmm.
boils down to, doesn't it?
Yep. Yep. And so, if I'm a parent, which I am, and I'm raising children when they're at their most impressionable, you have to, it's not enough just to, in the lessons that you teach your kids about their body and all of that, it's you become a role model for them in terms of how you treat your body and talk about your body.
I didn't know that about you, that you are a parent, but I'm glad you raised that point, because I wanted to ask a question to you about influence of media and particularly social media in this, body image eating disorder, but just the whole space of self-worth. How I'm not a parent, but one day would like to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it concerns me in the sense that, knowing that how much I was bombarded by, this is the ideal, you need to be this, you're not good enough until you are this. How do you go about, navigating that with your own kids?
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm learning on the job, as I think most parents are. Um, One of the most famous therapists ever, at least here in the States, is a fellow named Carl Rogers. And he came up with this notion that, in a therapeutic relationship, one of the important components is unconditional positive regard. And I think that's something that my partner and I try to bring to our child rearing, is unconditional positive regard. That doesn't mean we don't ever get frustrated or upset with them. It doesn't mean that we don't impose consequences when that needs to happen, but it does mean that we always make sure that they know that no matter what they say or do, that we still love them and value them, so that they know they always, and that we value them for a lot of different reasons, not just how well they do on the basketball court or on the dance floor or whatever. I think that's important, is praising them for the unique strengths that they have. So I think that's the one thing that pops to mind for me as being really important, but it can be challenging.
Mm. I wonder, and again, I'm speculating here. I haven't seen this at all in literature, but I do wonder, like, what the correlation between, like, say, an insecure attachment style where you've got a lot more conditional regard, built into you from early years, and later development of things like eating and body image disorder.
I think it's there. I bet if you dug a bit into attachment, because I know that's an approach that a lot of like eating disorder specialists will take, is getting to that attachment style. Are you avoidant or what have you? But I would imagine that's it's a big part of it. And so that's why it's just so important. So I would think, so that we don't have patterns repeating themselves, we need young adults who are going to be parents to understand, if you're going to be a parent, you bear some of the responsibility for these things. Not all of it, because we know at some point they go out in the real world and they get their own social media accounts. But even if it's, just the unconditional positive regard and teaching them to question and be critical of what they see. I don't know if so I'm kind of strange, because I'm actually not on social media at all. My partner's on Facebook. She'll occasionally show me things, and she showed me something yesterday that just blew me away. Paula Abdul, you know who Paula Abdul is? She was a kind of a yeah, she was on American Idol. She was a judge in the 80s and 90s. She was a famous pop star in the States. probably worldwide too. I don't know how old she is now. She's got to be it, probably well into her 50s, if not 60. So, not knowing any that, this was about Paul Abdul, my wife showed me a photo. Look at this photo of this person. How old would you say they are? And I did not know who they were. I said, oh, that they're probably 20. I mean, this woman looked to be 18, 19, 20. It was Paula Abdul. And it was her filtering of her face that literally made her look probably 35 to 40 years younger than she actually is. And that's a subtle message that we send to young men and women, that you got to keep up appearances and all the anti-aging, and that's very detrimental, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't see that post, but I'm sure it didn't say you need to look like this, but that's the implicit message, isn't it? And when you're bombarded with that all the time.
And we know, like any, major societal issue, it's not the in your face stuff that makes it stick. It's the subtle under the surface, as with racism, as with any of like the isms, right? It's the subtle. And I think this is an example of that. And with a lot of the images that we see in the health and fitness world, you generally don't see regular people. Years ago here, and I don't know if they're still around, there was a little gym, a chain of gyms. It was called Curves. It was for women, and it was supposed to be, there were no mirrors, and it was only for women. And the idea was it's just for like regular people. And so even the advertising just showed regular people. But that not the most common. More common is that you see people who don't really look like the consumer.
I actually, this wasn't on my list of questions, so to speak, but you mentioned like your own lived experience and your own personal experience, and I'm wondering if you feel comfortable talking about that. Did that motivate you to get into this field of research and practice?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm like have vivid memories from probably about the age of 5 or 6 of just being captivated by the Rocky movies here, Sylvester Stallone. And that was we watched those movies a lot in my house. My whole family did. And, he had this heroic figure, right, who also, over time somehow became more ripped and muscular and cut up across the movies as he got older. And then along with that, I got really into professional wrestling as a kid, and these larger than life, real life action heroes and the bodies that they had. And now I wasn't saying, wow, look at their bodies and I want to look like that, but I internalized it. I internalized that media. And so I remember even as young as 8, 9, 10, already being aware that, oh, I have a belly. I don't look the way that I think I should look. And so already being interested in how can I change that? And so I started to do that. As I got into my preteen and teen years, I was an athlete in high school, so I did that. But I also got really interested in weights for the purpose not of building muscle strength or endurance or all, fitness necessarily, but for the purpose of looking the way that I thought, a young man, an eligible bachelor should look, and the way that, the mates that I was trying to attract wanted me to look, and the way that guys around me, would admire. So, the supplement story was part of that. I spent a lot of time and money, and it wasn't all bad. I mean, I would say like lifting weights and my body changing that sort of cause effect, um, in a lot of ways was really good for my own self-esteem and confidence. Um, and I think I had a good support system around me, good, in research we call moderators with my family and other, academics and things of that nature, to where I had a buffer. But I was a little bit obsessive for sure. Now that as I look back, I was a bit obsessive, on holidays and vacations with the family. I would sort of like, if I couldn't find a gym or go to a gym, I would be doing push-ups and things to, make sure that I, maintained my muscle mass. Um, and that continued into my mid late 20s. And then I never lost an interest in exercising and working out, but my priorities shifted. And then I realized, ooh, this is something people are starting to research. This is like now early 2000s, and people like Harrison Pope and Don McCreary is another one. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there's some folks in Australia who did some really good research on this in the 2000s. And I also had this interest in athletes, so I thought, oh, this could be something that I contribute to, and that's how I found my doctoral mentor and doctoral program, and away I went.
Mm. Oh, very interesting. It's always interesting to hear how people got into their fields of research, and yeah, usually there is some connection between personal experience and
Oh, absolutely, and that's how you do your best stuff, right? When it's something you can connect with. And then to add on to this is important, I think, both on the male and the female side of this, is that a lot of the behaviors that go along with, altering your body, on the surface appear to be quite healthy. And so as a parent, and I think my parents went through this, I think they were pretty pleased that I had an interest in going to the gym 5 times a week and exercising. But there was a point where they became concerned, but it took a while. Once they saw me coming home with lots of supplements, that was a red flag to them, finally. But spending, 10, 15 hours a week at the gym, they didn't think much of that. But that very well could have become a problem. So I think parents have to be pretty vigilant and know what to look for. And this is where the information, education, and advertisements come in, especially now with social media, because we're hearing about the obesity problem and kids need to be more active, and so parents consume that, and so maybe they're not thinking as much about the potential dark side of that.
that's an excellent point. Yeah, what appears healthy may on the outside may not be.
Bingo. Yep.
Fascinating. I suppose finally then, Nick, do you have any advice or anything you wanted to kind of just part on to listeners to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if you're listening to this or watching this, you're somebody who probably cares about these issues. So think about yourself as an advocate. If you're on social media, what are you posting? What messages are you sending about yourself and about, what you value? And thinking about how you contribute, or either to this problem or to the solution on social media, because I do believe social media can be a very powerful tool for positive change if it's used that way. um, Find, your super strengths that involve things that you can do, less so than the ways that you look. um, Appreciate your body for what it can do, rather than how it looks in the mirror. Um, and that's going to look different for everybody. Figure out what your values are, and try and live your life, in accordance with those values. And if you're really struggling, get help, because there are professionals who who can help you.